The dust of FOB Nightingale tasted of rust and altitude. It settled on everything. A fine red powder that coated the HESCO barriers, the satellite dishes, and the faces of the tired soldiers moving with the leaden slowness of oxygen deprivation. Alara Vance felt it on her tongue. A gritty welcome to the highest, most isolated outpost in the Zagros mountain range. She wore simple, unmarked fatigues, the fabric stiff and new, the only insignia the silver eagles of a full colonel on her collar. They were a lie, a comfortable fiction for the next 72 hours. Her real rank was folded into a sealed orders packet in her duffel bag, waiting for the right moment or the right crisis. She walked from the helipad toward the squat, sandbagged structure of the Tactical Operations Center, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The air was thin enough to make a conversation a chore, but the silence was deeper than that. It was the silence of a place that knew it was on its own. The hum of generators was the only constant, a mechanical heartbeat in the vast, unforgiving landscape of stone and sky. Inside the TOC, the contrast was jarring. A cave of modern warfare, where the cold, ancient rock of the mountainside was plastered with the glowing blue and green of tactical displays. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic vines, feeding data to screens that showed drone feeds, topographical maps, and encrypted chat windows. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, ozone from the electronics, and the faint, ever-present odor of nervous sweat. A thick-necked sergeant with a jaw like a cinder block and the name Davies stitched over his pocket glanced up as she entered. His eyes flicked to her collar, then to the logistics corps insignia. A sword crossed with a quill, and a slow, contemptuous smile spread across his face. He leaned over to a younger corporal, his voice a low rumble meant to be overheard. "Look at that. High Command sent a bean counter to make sure our paperwork is in order. Hope she brought her favorite pen." The corporal snickered, quickly stifling it when Vance's gaze passed over him. She didn't stop, didn't react. Her face was a neutral mask, her eyes taking in the room, the flow of information, the posture of the soldiers. She cataloged the details. The frayed cable on the primary comms console, the disorganized stacks of printouts near the map table, the way the officer in charge, a colonel by his insignia, stood with his back to half the room, focused entirely on a screen showing drone strike footage. Hubris. It had a particular posture. The colonel, Thorne, finally turned as his executive officer murmured something and gestured toward her. Marcus Thorne was the kind of officer who looked like he'd been sculpted from a recruiting poster. Sharp jaw, confident eyes, an aura of kinetic energy that bordered on aggressive impatience. He strode toward her, his hand outstretched but his smile not reaching his eyes. "Colonel Vance, is it?" Marcus Thorne, his handshake was a brief, powerful squeeze. "Welcome to the sharp end. We don't get many visitors from your department up here. Try not to get any dust on your spreadsheets." The dismissal was immediate, wrapped in a veneer of professional courtesy as thin as the mountain air. Sergeant Davies, lingering nearby, smirked openly. Thorne had set the tone, and his subordinates were happy to follow. "I'm here to audit your network resilience and supply chain redundancies, Colonel," Vance said, her voice even and quiet, forcing them to lean in slightly to hear her over the hum of the servers. "Redundancies," Thorne laughed, a short, sharp bark. He swept a hand toward the screens. "My redundancy is overwhelming firepower. My supply chain is built on speed and aggression. We don't sit around waiting for things to break, Colonel. We take the fight to the enemy. That's how we stay safe." He launched into a tour, though it felt more like a victory lap. He pointed out kill counts, successful operations, the range of his patrols. Lieutenant Patel, a young officer with earnest eyes and a fresh academy haircut, tried to brief Vance on the technical specifications of their network architecture, but Thorne constantly cut him off. "Patel, she doesn't need the technical mumbo-jumbo. She needs to know the system works. And it works because my men are the best." Vance stopped him. Her gaze fixed on a schematic Patel had managed to flash on a screen for a brief moment. "Your primary satellite link. It's routed through the Kassir repeater station." "Correct." "That's right," Thorne said, annoyed by the interruption. And the secondary, also through Kassir, different frequency, military-grade encryption. So you have one physical point of failure for all long-haul communications, Vance stated. It wasn't a question. What's the contingency if Kassir goes down? Or if the signal is jammed locally? Thorne's confident expression tightened. The question hung in the air, an unwelcome specter of doubt in his temple of aggression. Sergeant Davies stepped forward, as if to defend his commander's honor. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he began, his tone dripping with the opposite. "The only contingency we need is more ammunition. We solve problems with bullets, not with backup plans." The sentiment was so perfectly aligned with Thorne's that it was clear this was the prevailing philosophy of FOB Nightingale, a doctrine of brute force where foresight was seen as a form of weakness. Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "We don't plan for failure, Vance. We achieve victory. Patel, show the colonel to the spare office. I'm sure she has many important forms to fill out." The office was a closet-sized space partitioned off next to the server room. The heat from the machines was stifling, and the noise was a constant, deafening roar. It was a deliberate slight, a calculated bit of professional ostracization. She was the outsider, the bureaucrat, the woman who didn't belong at the sharp end. A young corporal with dark, intelligent eyes and the name Sharma on her uniform appeared at the door a few minutes later, holding out a chipped ceramic mug. "Coffee, ma'am? It's pretty terrible, but it's hot." Vance looked up from the ruggedized laptop she'd already set up. "Thank you, Corporal." Sharma lingered for a second. "Don't mind them, ma'am. They get like this. The colonel, he rewards aggression. Anything else is seen as doubt." "I've noticed," Vance said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard, pulling up network diagrams and logistics manifests from the server. "What's your role here, Corporal?" "Comms tech. I try to keep the ghosts in the machines happy." "Are they happy, Corporal Sharma?" Sharma's face clouded. "No, ma'am. They're not. There are inconsistencies. Lag spikes that don't make sense. Data packets dropping for no reason. The colonel says it's atmospheric interference from the solar flares, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels deliberate." Vance paused her typing, her eyes meeting Sharma's. For the first time since her arrival, a flicker of something other than placid observation crossed her face. A spark of focused intensity. "Show me," she said. For the next few hours, Vance and Sharma huddled over a diagnostic console, ignoring the condescending glances from the command staff. Vance worked with a quiet, methodical precision that belied her logistics insignia. She moved through lines of code and data logs like a native, her questions to Sharma sharp and insightful. She wasn't just auditing. She was hunting. Thorne and Davies passed by once, sharing a look that clearly communicated their amusement at the sight of the bean counter, playing tech support. Vance paid them no mind. She was listening to the network, and it was telling her a story that had nothing to do with solar flares. It was a story of infiltration, of patience, of a predator circling just out of sight. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the predator was about to strike. The first sign of the real crisis wasn't a bang, but a whisper, a flicker on the main tactical display. The feed from a predator drone circling 10 miles out went pixelated, then froze on a single corrupted frame of brown rock. "We've lost the feed from Predator 2, Lieutenant Patel announced, his voice tight. Colonel Thorne, hunched over a map planning his next aggressive patrol, barely looked up. "Re-establish the link, Lieutenant. It's the damn atmospherics again." "Trying, sir. The system isn't responding." On the other side of the TOC, Corporal Sharma shook her head, her eyes wide with alarm as she stared at her own monitor. "It's not the link, sir. The whole ISR network is lagging. I'm seeing massive packet loss across all platforms." Vance stood behind her, her expression grim. "It's a coordinated attack, Corporal," she said, her voice low but carrying. "They're not just jamming. They're injecting garbage data. It's a denial of service attack, but targeted at the sensor level." Thorne finally turned, his face a mask of irritation. "Colonel Vance, I have a team of qualified technicians to handle this. Your input, while I'm sure is well-intentioned, is not required." "Your qualified technicians are telling you it's a problem," Vance countered, her tone remaining flat, refusing to rise to his bait. "And your solution is to ignore them." Before Thorne could retort, another screen went black. Then another. The sensor grid that monitored the FOB's perimeter began to flash with ghost signatures. Dozens of them, appearing and disappearing in impossible locations. The system was being overwhelmed with false positives, rendering it useless. "What the hell is going on?" Davies growled, his knuckles white on the edge of a console. "Is this a drill?" "This is not a drill," Vance said. "This is the overture. The physical attack is next." Thorne scoffed, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Nonsense. It's a sophisticated hack, nothing more. They're trying to spook us. The best response is to show them we're not afraid." He stabbed a finger at the tactical map. "I want Reaper and Ghost patrols to push out to sectors Gamma and Delta. I want eyes on those ridges now. We'll find these bastards and eliminate them." "Sir, that's a mistake," Patel blurted out, a flicker of his academy training surfacing. "Pushing patrols out blind, with our sensors compromised, is against doctrine." Thorne's glare was withering. "Your doctrine doesn't get you a chest full of medals, Lieutenant. My orders do. Now get it done." As Patel reluctantly relayed the orders over a comms channel already starting to crackle with static, Vance walked over to the main map. "Colonel," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "you are sending your men exactly where the enemy wants them to go. They've blinded you, and now they're hurting you." "Get away from my map table, Vance," Thorne snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Go back to your closet and count your paper clips. This is a job for soldiers." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive line drawn in the sand. But the world was already crumbling under Thorne's feet. As his patrols moved out, their icons on the map began to flicker. The static on the comms grew louder, swallowing voices until only unintelligible shrieks remained. Sharma worked frantically at her station. "I'm losing everything, sir. The primary sat link is gone. Switching to secondary. Negative. Secondary is also down. It's Kassir. The whole repeater station is offline." The blue-green glow of the TOC died. The screens went black, one by one, like dying stars. The only light came from the red emergency lamps, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The hum of the high-tech equipment was replaced by a terrifying, profound silence, broken only by the frantic, useless clicks of keyboards and the hiss of dead comms channels. "What's happening?" Patel's voice was a panicked whisper in the dark. "We're deaf, dumb, and blind," Davies muttered, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Thorne stood frozen in the center of the room, his face illuminated by the red glow. He was an emperor with no empire, a commander with no command. He shouted an order, "Get me regional command on the line, now!" But his voice was swallowed by the dead air. His entire philosophy of warfare, built on technology and aggression, had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes. FOB Nightingale was an island, cut off from the world, and the tide was rising. In the crimson gloom, a single figure moved with calm, deliberate purpose. Alara Vance stepped out from her corner, her face unreadable. The chaos and rising panic seemed to part around her as if she were the eye of the storm. The collapse of the digital world did not faze her. She had been expecting it. She walked past the frantic, useless attempts to reboot dead systems, her eyes scanning the TOC not for what was lost, but for what remained. Her gaze fell upon a dusty, forgotten corner, where a stack of obsolete equipment lay covered by a faded green tarp. She pulled the tarp away, revealing a relic from a bygone era. An old T312 field telephone, its thick black casing covered in a film of red dust. Beside it was a spool of WD-1 communication wire. Analog, physical, unhackable. Davies. Her voice cut through the panicked murmurings. It wasn't loud, but it held a new and startling weight. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Sergeant Davies, who had been trying to raise the lost patrols on a dead radio, looked up, startled. "Get me a line team," Vance said, already beginning to unspool the wire, her movements economical and sure. "2 men. We're running a hard line to the comms tower on the ridge. Now." Davies stared at her, his mouth half open to deliver a sarcastic retort. He glanced instinctively toward Colonel Thorne for direction, but Thorne was still a statue of disbelief, staring at the blank map where the icons of his men had been. The chain of command had fractured. In that moment of paralysis, Davies saw the absolute certainty in Vance's eyes. He saw a plan where there had only been chaos. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then gave a curt nod. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and barked at 2 nearby soldiers. You. With me. Grab your tools." Vance didn't wait to see them leave. She moved to a still-powered maintenance terminal, one that was slaved directly to the server core. She ignored the graphical user interface, the compromised operating system. She dropped into a command line interface, a black screen with a simple green cursor. Her fingers became a blur on the keyboard, typing in low-level diagnostic commands that bypassed the layers of infected software. Corporal Sharma, drawn by the activity, came to stand behind her. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" "Diagnosing the payload," Vance said without looking up. The denial of service was just a smokescreen on the screen. Strings of code scrolled past. Vance's eyes tracked them, filtering the noise, seeking the pattern. There. It's a cascading logic bomb, triggered by a specific data request from Predator 2 just before it went down. They used our own ISR platform to deliver the malware. It propagated through the network via the drone's handshake protocol. "Elegant," she said the last word with a surgeon's dispassionate respect for a well-executed incision. Her fingers flew again, cross-referencing the malware's faint residual signal with the last known telemetry data from the moments before the crash. A crude triangulation began to form on the raw data plot she was building. "They're not in the valleys," she murmured, more to herself than to Sharma. "They're on the high ground." Too high for a conventional assault team, she stood and walked to the physical map table, the one Thorne had claimed as his exclusive domain. She picked up a red grease pencil. "Their electronic warfare teams are here," she said, circling a jagged peak on the map. "And here another circle. And here a third." The locations were all on treacherous high ridges that Thorne's patrols had always deemed impassable and strategically worthless. She turned to face the shell-shocked colonel. "Colonel Thorne, your patrols weren't ambushed by chance. They were surgically excised. The enemy used the ghost signals to funnel them into pre-sighted kill zones. They knew your patrol routes because you never changed them." Thorne flinched as if struck. The statement was flat, a clinical diagnosis of his failure. There was no "I told you so," which somehow made it worse. Vance was now the center of gravity in the room. The red emergency light glinted in her eyes. "Lieutenant Patel," she snapped, her voice sharp, "get me a physical count of all 81mm mortar rounds and 50 caliber ammunition. Not what the inventory system says. I want eyes on the actual crates. Go." Patel, galvanized, scrambled to obey. "Corporal Sharma, go to the main server room. Physically disconnect the medical bay's local network from the main backbone. Power it down and reboot it on the infirmary's backup generator only. I want one clean, isolated system. Nothing gets in or out." Sharma nodded, her fear replaced by focused purpose. "Yes, ma'am." Vance's gaze swept the room, assessing every soldier, every piece of equipment. She was no longer a logistics officer. She was a battlefield commander remaking the world in her own image, one piece at a time. She was building a new nervous system for the FOB, one of wire, runners, and human will. Just then, the ground shuddered. A deep, percussive thump echoed from outside, followed by the scream of incoming ordnance. The first enemy mortar round landed with a deafening crash, striking the vehicle depot. A secondary explosion blossomed into the night as a fuel tanker went up. Panic erupted again. Soldiers ducked, shouting. Vance didn't even flinch. She stood locked in place, listening. Another thump. Another scream. The second round landed closer, near the main barracks. "They're ranging," she announced, her voice a calm island in the sea of noise. "They have the layout of this base. They'll walk the rounds right into this TOC. All non-essential personnel to the Southside bunkers. Now!" As soldiers scrambled for cover, she turned to the FOB's mortar team NCO, who was staring out a slit in the sandbags, his face pale. "Sergeant, what's the status of your tubes?" "Tubes are hot, ma'am, but we have no spotter, no target data." Vance strode back to the map. She pointed to the first circle she had drawn. "Fire for effect. Grid square 4-7, Alpha, elevation 2000. Full battery, 5 rounds, suppression pattern. Now." "But ma'am, that's a blind fire. We have no confirmation." "You have my confirmation, Sergeant," Vance said, her voice dropping to an icy calm that brooked no argument. "When you are done, you will immediately shift your fire to grid 5-2 Charlie. Do not wait for corrections. Do not wait for orders. Your job is to make them keep their heads down while I figure out how to cut them off. Execute." The sergeant stared at her for a second. Then a look of dawning comprehension crossed his face. This wasn't random. This was a plan. He turned and relayed the orders, his voice now steady and confident. Outside, the FOB's own mortars began to answer, their deep-throated coughs a defiant reply to the enemy's attack. Vance stood over the map, the red light casting her face in demonic relief. She wasn't just defending. She was counterattacking, using a ghost's knowledge of her enemy's methods. She was fighting a battle in her head, a battle of signals and ghosts, and using the base's last remaining weapons to make it real. The bean counter was gone. A general was at war. The fight for FOB Nightingale devolved into a primal, brutal affair. The enemy, confident in their electronic superiority, began their ground assault. Figures swarmed in the darkness, moving toward the perimeter, expecting to sweep through a panicked and disorganized defense. They were met with a wall of disciplined fire. Vance had repositioned the heavy machine guns, creating interlocking fields of fire based on the most likely avenues of approach, a classic defensive posture that Thorne, in his arrogance, had neglected in favor of mobile patrols. Sergeant Davies and his line team returned, breathless and covered in grime, just as the first waves of the assault hit the wire. "Line is run, ma'am," Davies yelled over the cacophony of gunfire. "It's thin, but it's connected to the tower's relay box." "Good work, Sergeant," Vance said, already moving toward the old field telephone. She plugged a headset into the jack, one hand on the crank. She didn't try to call regional command. She didn't try to call for an evacuation. She keyed the handset's clicker, tapping out a short, rhythmic sequence. 3 clicks, a pause, 1, a pause, 7. It was a prearranged digital handshake, a code so old it predated most of the soldiers in the room. A moment of static, then a single, clear click came back in response. Connection was made. Vance began to speak, but not in plain language. Her transmission was a compressed burst of alphanumeric code, spoken in a clipped, toneless cadence. Ghost 7 requesting Archangel protocol. Nightingale is compromised. Active threat Tier 1. Hostile C2 nodes triangulated at. She recited the coordinates she had marked on the map. Requesting asset confirmation and kinetic response. Authenticate Sierra Victor 9er. Lieutenant Patel, who had returned from the ammunition count and was now coordinating runners between the fighting positions, overheard the transmission. He froze. Ghost 7. The name was a whisper, a legend from the Academy's classified history lessons. A deep penetration signals intelligence unit from the early days of the global conflict. They were phantoms who specialized in dismantling enemy command and control networks from the inside out, often operating for months without contact. The unit was officially listed as deactivated over a decade ago, its members' identities scrubbed from all records. Patel looked at the unassuming colonel, the logistics officer they had all mocked. He saw the way she held the handset, the utter lack of fear in her eyes as explosions rocked the bunker. He saw a ghost. Before anyone could process what was happening, a new voice cut through on a single, reserved emergency channel that flickered to life on Sharma's console. The channel was labeled Stratcom Priority Alpha, Global Strategic Command. Nightingale Tosi, this is Archangel, the voice said, tinny but imbued with absolute authority. We read your Ghost 7 transmission. Authentication confirmed. Standby asset is active. Support is inbound. Thorn, who had been trying to rally a fire team near the entrance, stopped dead. His head snapped toward the comms console, then to Vance. Archangel, the call sign for the high-level command that had overseen the Ghost program. The pieces slammed together in his mind with the force of a physical blow. The audit, the unassuming demeanor, the quiet, probing questions about their vulnerabilities. She wasn't here to check his paperwork. She was a contingency, a failsafe sent to observe his command, waiting for the inevitable moment it would break. He felt a wave of cold, sickening dread wash over him, a dread that had nothing to do with the enemy outside. It was the realization of his own catastrophic failure, witnessed by a legend he didn't even know was in the room. At that moment, Davies stumbled back into the TOC, his face pale. "Ma'am, we found this on the west perimeter, near where Reaper Patrol went dark." He held up a standard-issue patrol radio, smashed almost beyond recognition. But taped to the back, almost invisible, was a tiny, sophisticated electronic device with a small antenna. It was still warm. Vance took the device, her fingers gently probing its casing. "A parasitic transmitter," she said, her diagnosis swift and certain. It piggybacked their own comm signal, broadcasting their location and everything they said directly to the enemy. They weren't just jammed. They were compromised from within. Someone on this base planted this. Her eyes lifted, and for a fleeting second, they met Thorn's. Your predictable patrol schedules and roster gave the enemy a precise timetable. They knew which radio to target, and when. The accusation was unspoken but absolute. Thorn's aggressive, predictable strategy had not only failed, it had actively aided the enemy. He had led his men into a slaughter. Suddenly, the lights in the TOC flickered, and the main tactical display, the one slaved to Vance's terminal, blazed to life. It wasn't their old network. This was a new one, a direct, high-bandwidth laser communication link from a single high-altitude asset. A map of the entire mountain range appeared, rendered in stunning, real-time detail. Red icons, dozens of them, pulsed across the terrain, marking the exact location of every enemy soldier, every mortar tube, every command post. A new voice, calm and professional, spoke directly into Vance's headset, audible only to her. "Ghost 7, this is Archangel Actual. We have you. Your eyes are restored. The theater is yours. How do you want to play this?" Thorn, Davies, and Patel could only stare at the screen, at the godlike view of the battlefield it provided. They looked at Vance, who was now plugged directly into the most powerful intelligence asset on the planet. They had dismissed her as a bureaucrat, a clerk. They now understood they were in the presence of something else entirely. She was a weapon long-sheathed that had just been drawn. With the Archangel link established, the character of the battle changed instantly. Vance became the conductor of a symphony of destruction, and FOB Nightingale was her orchestra. The red emergency lights still bathed the TOC in a hellish glow, but it was now a focused, controlled hell. "Archangel, this is Ghost 7. She spoke into her headset, her voice a low, steady rhythm against the percussion of outgoing mortar fire. "I have 3 primary targets. Enemy C2 nodes. I am painting them for you now." On the main screen, 3 of the red icon clusters flashed and turned gold. "Targets painted," came the reply from her headset. "Requesting ordnance. Designate targets Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Tasking Alpha and Bravo for immediate kinetic strike. Non-nuclear precision ordnance. Danger close protocols are waived. I own this grid. A ripple of shock went through the few soldiers left in the TOC. Waiving danger close protocols was an act of supreme confidence, or supreme insanity. It meant she was authorizing strikes so near to her own theoretical position that the system would normally prohibit them. Copy that, Ghost 7. Danger close waived. Rounds in the air. Time to impact on Alpha and Bravo. 90 seconds. Vance didn't wait. She turned to the FOB mortar sergeant. Sergeant, cease fire on your current targets. Shift to grid 8-1 Echo. It's a ravine. The enemy is using it to stage their next assault wave. The sergeant, now looking at her with something approaching religious awe, relayed the orders. The FOB's mortars coughed, sending another volley of shells into the darkness, this time guided by the unerring eye of the Archangel satellite. On the tactical map, a cluster of red icons in a narrow valley flashed, then vanished. A chorus of faint, distant screams was carried on the wind. Archangel target Charlie. Vance continued, her focus absolute. That's their EW unit. I don't want it destroyed. I want it disabled. Tasking for high-altitude EMP burst. Localized effect. Maximum radius 100 meters. Copy Ghost 7. Retasking asset for non-kinetic effect. EMP charge initiated. Time to impact. 45 seconds. Thorne watched, mesmerized. She wasn't just killing the enemy. She was dissecting them, taking out their command, then their reinforcements, then blinding them by disabling their electronic warfare capability, all in a sequence designed for maximum psychological impact. It was brutal, elegant, and terrifyingly efficient. The 90 seconds elapsed. Far up on the high ridges, two silent, brilliant flashes of light illuminated the mountaintops for a fraction of a second, followed moments later by the deep, rolling thunder of the impacts, a sound that was felt in the bones as much as it was heard. On the tactical display, the two gold icons representing the enemy command nodes blinked out of existence. 45 seconds after that, another, stranger thing happened. The static that had plagued their local comms channels abruptly died. A voice, panicked and speaking in a foreign tongue, suddenly burst from one of the dead radios on the console. Then another. The enemy's encrypted comms network, its protection stripped away by the EMP burst, was now naked and open. Sharma, at her console, began to record everything, her eyes wide. They were hearing the enemy's command net collapse in real time. Vance listened for a moment, her head tilted. They're broken, she said simply. They've lost command and their local comms are compromised. The assault will falter. And it did. The pressure on the perimeter lessened almost immediately. The disciplined waves of attackers dissolved into confused, scattered groups. The FOB's defenders, now guided by Patel and Davies relaying Vance's clear, precise instructions, picked them off with methodical efficiency. The battle wasn't over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. As the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the last of the enemy fire sputtered out. The attack had been utterly, comprehensively crushed. The enemy wasn't just defeated. They were annihilated, their command structure decapitated, their forces shattered and scattered across the mountainside. In the sudden, ringing silence of the TOC, the only sounds were the exhausted breathing of the soldiers and the quiet hum of the single active terminal displaying the Archangel feed. The floor was littered with spent casings, discarded field dressing wrappers, and the detritus of a desperate fight. Colonel Thorne stood stiffly, his uniform torn and stained, his face a mask of grime and exhaustion. He looked at the tactical map, at the handful of friendly icons that remained, then at the vast, empty spaces where the enemy's formidable force had been. He walked slowly across the room, his boots crunching on debris, and stopped in front of Vance. She was still seated, her headset now resting on the console, her gaze fixed on the screen as she monitored the enemy's retreat. He stood there for a long moment, the commander of the base before the woman he had ridiculed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What could he say? I'm sorry? Thank you? The phrases were pitifully inadequate. They were alive because of her. His career was over, but his men were alive. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, pulling himself to his full height. He clicked his heels together, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. Slowly, deliberately, he brought his right hand up to his brow in a salute. It was not the casual gesture of a superior, but the rigid, formal sign of ultimate respect a soldier gives to a commander they would follow into hell. "My command is yours, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sergeant Davies, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, saw the salute. He had spent the last hours of the night fighting with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, all of it guided by the calm, disembodied voice of the woman he had mocked as a bean counter. His cynicism had been burned away by the fire of her competence. He straightened up from his console, his back ramrod straight, and rendered his own sharp salute. Lieutenant Patel, his youthful face aged by a decade in a single night, followed suit. Then Corporal Sharma. One by one, every soldier remaining in the Tactical Operations Center turned to face Alara Vance and saluted. The air, thick with the smell of cordite and fear, was now charged with a new, powerful current. Respect, earned in blood and fire. Vance finally looked away from the screen. She looked at Thorne, at Davies, at the faces of the soldiers looking back at her. Her expression was unchanged. No triumph, no gloating, just a deep, abiding weariness. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "As you were, Colonel," she said, her voice quiet. She turned back to her work, leaving them standing in the silent, profound aftermath of their own judgment. The sun rose over the shattered peaks of the Zargos Range, its clean, cold light spilling across the valley and illuminating the wreckage of the night's battle. Smoke still coiled from the burned-out vehicle depot, and the outer perimeter was a grim landscape of twisted wire and still forms. But the FOB was secure. The air, once filled with the scream of mortars and the chatter of machine guns, was now quiet, broken only by the distant cry of a mountain bird and the low murmur of soldiers tending to the wounded. Inside the TOC, a semblance of order was returning. Medics moved with quiet efficiency, and damage control teams were assessing the crippled infrastructure. Colonel Thorne was coordinating the recovery of his fallen patrols. His voice heavy but his orders clear. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a somber gravity. He was a man hollowed out and remade by his failure. A priority communications packet, rerouted through the Archangel link before it was terminated, arrived on the one functioning console. It was flagged for Thorne's eyes only. He opened the file, his fingers stiff. He expected it to be his dismissal, a formal notice of the end of his career. The document that appeared on the screen was something else entirely. It was a single page stamped with the seal of the Joint Chiefs. A promotion and transfer order, dated 3 days prior. Top secret / eyes only. Subject: Promotion and Command Assignment. 1. Effective 0600Z, Colonel Alara V. Vance, Service Number 7-7, GHOST, is promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. 2. Upon formal announcement, Brigadier General Vance will assume command of the 77th Cyber Warfare Division, Stratcom. 3. Her current assignment is a covert command readiness assessment of Forward Operating Base Nightingale. Full command authority is granted, to be exercised at her discretion. Thorne read the words once, then a second time, the letters seeming to blur. Brigadier General. Her service number. 7-7, GHOST. It wasn't a unit call sign. It was her identity. She had been a general when she walked through his door. A general wearing a colonel's eagles, and he had sent her to a storage closet. He had told a general to go count paper clips while his command burned to the ground. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush of shame that rose from his gut to his face. But beneath it was a deeper, more profound understanding. She hadn't corrected him. She hadn't pulled rank. She had simply waited, observed, and when the moment came, she had acted. She had earned the respect of his men not with the authority of her hidden rank, but with the undeniable power of her competence. He looked across the TOC. Vance was in the corner by the server racks, which were now silent and cold. She was working with Corporal Sharma not on the complex network but on a single salvaged server blade. She held a small, delicate brush, and she was methodically, patiently, cleaning the dust from its intricate circuits. It was the careful, focused work of a restorer, of someone who builds and maintains things. The quill, not the sword. And yet, he had seen her wield the sword with more lethal precision than any soldier he had ever known. Thorn printed the order. He walked over to her, the single sheet of paper feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. Sharma saw him coming and respectfully stepped back. Vance didn't look up from her work. Thorn placed the printout quietly on the workbench beside her. She paused her cleaning, her eyes flicking to the paper for a bare second. She read the words that declared her a general, the words that confirmed everything Thorn now knew. Her expression didn't change. She gave a slight, almost dismissive nod, as if acknowledging a minor, irrelevant piece of administrative trivia. Then she turned back to the server blade and continued her meticulous cleaning. The promotion, the authority, the vindication, none of it mattered as much as the task at hand. Later, as the sun climbed higher, casting the long shadows of the mountains into retreat, Vance stood alone on the western perimeter wall. She stared out at the vast, brutal beauty of the landscape where she had just fought and won a silent, secret war. She held a steaming mug of coffee, the warmth a small comfort in the biting wind. The base was a hive of activity below her. Wounded were being prepped for evac. Repair teams were working on the comms tower. The dead were being brought home. Quiet footsteps approached from behind. It was Corporal Sharma holding out a fresh, full mug. "General," Sharma said. The word was not loud, but it was spoken with absolute certainty. It was no longer a secret. It was a fact, as solid as the rock beneath their feet. Vance turned and took the mug, her fingers brushing Sharma's. "Thank you, Corporal." She looked back out at the mountains. A strand of graying hair, loosened from its severe bun during the night's chaos, whipped across her face in the wind. She didn't brush it away. She simply stood there, watching the new day unfold over her new, unofficial command. The silence between the young corporal and the newly revealed general was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. Respect had been forged. A watch had been kept. A ghost had done her work and was now, finally, stepping into the light. Her real war, the one she would command from the 77th, was just beginning.